Our final speaker's biographical note was a bit like playing Scrabble, so rich and varied are the acronyms therein. She's a board member of PACMARA, the Pacific Marine Analysis and Research Association, a member of the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, World Commission on Protected Areas, and head of the Marine Assessment and Decision Support System at UNEP WCMC, the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre. Please welcome Dr. Louisa Wood.
Okay. Keith. I have the delightful task of trying to make international policy exciting in 10 minutes. So here we go. I hope the dance was fun last night and this is going to really inspire you, hopefully. So I just thought it might be helpful. I don't know the audience fully. I'm assuming you're quite technical, but you may not be as familiar with the international policy arena. So to give you some background on UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre, we're essentially the specialist biodiversity arm of UNEP, and which is the UN Environment Programme. And we're mandated under various international conventions and other agreements to deliver a range of biodiversity-related information and services. So we've got quite a moderate-sized technical staff and thematic programs on climate change, marine protected areas. And we really try to deliver analysis and synthesis of the best available scientific information and data to inform policy. Really underpinning that, because it is global in nature and it's directed towards supporting governments in their decision making, and given the rate of need for better data and less uncertainty in decision making, we really had to look at bringing innovation into the way in which we amass and deliver data. So it's something that underpins the work that we do, and is common to the discussions here on Inspire. So the perspective that I'm coming from is really about that international science policy interface. So I've just got a few key messages, starting with a bit of a no-brainer. Interoperability really does matter, and I think the point that I'd like to make also is that while innovation is fundamentally a social process, it's also a political process and a scientific process. And sometimes I think the global perspective may seem to be too distant from the individual, but actually there are very tangible and real and meaningful points of connection. And this is where initiatives like the Inspire Directive can help to strengthen those connections. We've got an economic crisis, there's reporting fatigue, there are massive data gaps and data needs to achieve effective environmental management, and so interoperability is really important for every individual and for every institution that is working in this field. So just to give you that global perspective, there are global processes already established for reporting and assessment, and the way in which they are actually being implemented is evolving quite rapidly, at least on the time frame of those international processes. So just to give you an example, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity last year launched the Global Biodiversity Outlook. It was the third version of this document. It's completely indicator-based and intended to provide scenarios of the outlook for biodiversity. The intention was to have evidence-based indicators, although in the end it was only about 33% of countries were able to deliver evidence-based indicators rather than qualitative perceptions of the state and trends and pressures on the environment. The indicators as they existed were brought together by a huge consortium of organizations noted there. But as a consequence of that process, at the Conference of the Parties last October, so CBD has parties, basically every country in the world except for the US and the Holy See. So this is relevant to every government, including every government within the EU. And a formal decision was made at the last Conference of the Parties to really recognize the need to continue strengthening the ability to monitor biodiversity at all levels, and that goes down to the national level. So there's a new strategic plan with strategic goals and indicators and targets associated with those things. That process is ongoing, and it's directly relevant to the Inspire Directive. Another example is the UN regular process, possibly the longest title for an assessment process out there. It's for the global reporting and assessment of the state of the marine environment, including socioeconomic aspects, just in a nutshell. This has taken a very long time to be adopted, but the point of this is to provide a mechanism for regular assessment of the state of the marine environment at the global and supra-regional level. The intention is to have 5-year cycles in comparison to the 6-year cycle of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, for example. These two things are, have the potential to be aligned, but there are challenges in achieving that. So just to really bring home that point then, EU member state obligations extend to the global scale directly. They are all parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and they have obligations to meet under that convention. At the same time, there are the obligations under the EU level directives as well, and the challenge here is to try and bridge that gap to make sure that there's as little repetition as possible. So there's this huge convergence of data need, which is, I think, emulated in the Innovation Union strategy. It's emulated in the principles of the Inspire Directive. It's really about efficiency, interoperability, reusability. But it's also about quality of data and quantity. The questions that are being asked of decision makers, that are being asked of scientists right now, are much more complex and much more challenging than the data typically can answer. And so I think that one of the big challenges we face in this community is how to really harness innovation to massively transform the rate of generation and improvement of data that can inform assessments and decision making. I'll come back to that later. So Inspire as a directive across the globe is a really important trendsetter for standardization at national to regional scales and potentially also global scales. And I think that's really something to be proud of within the EU. It's something that can show tremendous leadership to trying to remove this repetition. So just to quote the directive and the CBD, what are called the IET targets, these were new targets adopted at the last conference of the parties last October, and these are what will define the way in which progress towards the fulfillment of the convention is measured for the next 10 years. So it's not complete, but it's just to give you an indication of the level of potential for interaction, and therefore the level of potential for conflict and duplication of effort, or the level of potential for synergy and streamlining. And I think that's what is really important to take from this. There is a huge amount of scope for direct interoperability with this global scale. And I just wanted to also mention that across the board, actually, there's the CBDIET Target 19 is really focusing on improving, sharing, and applying science and knowledge relating to biodiversity. That's also the essence, I think, of the Inspire Directive. How can we get better access to consistent information for better comparability and decision-making, and ultimately human well-being? So I think there's a massive opportunity here. I think there are also substantial challenges. I think the convergence is really on this need for efficiency, for reducing reporting fatigue, for making things simple. But there's also a huge opportunity for innovation to revolutionize the way in which decisions can be made by transforming the way in which we can use technologies, citizen science principles, to generate new, better, more meaningful data and analysis and interpretation. So I see this as a really exciting time. I think it's really exciting for the EU and the countries within the EU to demonstrate leadership, but it's also really exciting to see that convergence of understanding at these multiple scales. So I just would like to leave it there. Thank you for your time. I hope I made it exciting international policy. So, thank you.